The paper trembled in my hands, though the air in the kitchen was still. Sunlight cut across the counter, catching the edge of the envelope like a blade. My name was printed on it, but the words inside told me this house, the one I built my life in, no longer belonged to me. The sound of the clock on the wall felt louder than my heartbeat. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that it left you blind, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because stories like this don't just happen in movies. I stood there, surrounded by everything I loved, realizing I might lose it all. That was the moment everything started to unravel. It was a little past 2:30 p.m. when I found the letter on the kitchen counter. At first, I thought it was another bill, or maybe some mail for Brittany. The envelope had my name on it, but the handwriting wasn't hers. The paper inside felt too official, too stiff. I unfolded it, and that was the moment everything snapped. An eviction notice from my own house. I stood there, frozen, as the afternoon light cut across the table and the clock ticked louder than it ever had before. My hands trembled, but not from age. This was something colder. My mind tried to make sense of it, to fill in some mistake. But then I saw the signatures. My son's, his wife's. It felt like someone had drained all the air out of the room. The walls, the framed photos, the smell of coffee. It all suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I didn't belong there anymore. I remember touching the counter, the edge of the sink, anything solid, just to remind myself that I was still standing. The words blurred together. Vacate. 30 days. Failure to comply. It was written so cleanly, so professionally, like it wasn't tearing a life apart. Somewhere deep down, a small, steady voice whispered that I'd seen this coming. Not the notice, but the distance, the hushed arguments, the closed doors, the sudden coldness in my own home. Still, I never believed they'd go this far. I folded the paper back up, slowly, carefully, as if how I handled it might change what it said. Then I sat down, staring out the window at the garden I once planted with love. I guess I should start from the beginning. After my husband passed, the house felt too big and too quiet. The sound of the wind brushing against the windows was louder than it used to be, and the evenings stretched longer than I ever imagined they could. I filled the silence with small rituals, watering the garden every morning, making tea at 7:15 a.m. sharp, keeping his favorite chair exactly where it always was. It wasn't happiness, but it was peace. Daniel would call sometimes, busy with work, always promising to visit more. When he and Brittany finally came over one weekend, they noticed the cracked paint on the porch, the leaky faucet, the little things I had stopped paying attention to. They said I shouldn't be living here alone. They said they could help. At first, their presence brought warmth back into the house. Brittany cooked dinners, Daniel fixed the gutters, and for a while, the laughter around the table sounded almost like the old days. I was grateful. I thought maybe this was how life was supposed to circle back. Family taking care of each other. Love filling in the empty spaces left by loss. But small things started to shift. Brittany began reorganizing rooms without asking, saying it was for convenience. Daniel suggested putting my name and theirs together on the house paperwork, just in case anything ever happened. They started managing bills, telling me not to worry about money anymore. I wanted to see it as kindness. Maybe I needed to. There were moments when I caught a tone in Brittany's voice, something sharp under the sweetness, or the way Daniel looked past me when I spoke, like he was already somewhere else. Those moments passed quickly, but they left a chill I couldn't quite name. Still, I told myself family meant trust. After losing so much, I didn't want to lose them too. So, I stayed quiet. I believed their intentions were good. I wanted to believe it. Looking back now, I can see how love can make you ignore the quiet warnings, the faint signs that peace is starting to crack. I just didn't realize how quickly warmth could turn cold. It happened so slowly that I almost didn't notice when the balance began to shift. What started as help, simple, loving gestures, turned into quiet control. Brittany began managing the bills, saying she didn't want me to stress about numbers. She started ordering groceries, changing the brands I'd used for decades. Daniel told me it was easier that way, that Brittany was just trying to help. I wanted to believe him. At first, it felt like convenience, but soon, I noticed I had to ask before inviting anyone over. My own kitchen began to feel foreign. Cabinets I used to reach for without thinking were rearranged. My dishes boxed up and replaced with new sets I never picked. Brittany called it refreshing the space, but somehow, it no longer felt like mine. Daniel grew quieter. He worked long hours, came home tired, and avoided small talk. When I mentioned how the house felt different, he smiled weakly and said I was overthinking. Maybe I was. Maybe grief was making me sensitive. That's what I told myself. But the feeling kept growing, like I was living in someone else's home. Decisions were made without me. Paint colors changed. Furniture was moved. And suddenly, the garden I loved so much was too much upkeep. One morning, I found my late husband's tools gone from the shed. Brittany said she donated them because no one was using them anyway. I didn't even have the strength to argue. The final shift came quietly, hidden in a stack of mail. I was looking for an old insurance statement when I found a letter from the county office. It referenced a property update, something about a joint ownership transfer. My heart sank. I couldn't remember signing anything like that. I took out the folder Brittany kept in the desk and started flipping through pages. There it was. My name, but in smaller print, below Daniel's and Brittany's. The title no longer said owner. It said co-occupant. The room spun for a moment. I sat down, holding the paper as the truth began to settle, like a weight in my chest. All those months of signing routine documents, trusting them to handle things, had turned my home into something I no longer owned. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt unfamiliar. The floorboards creaked under someone else's authority. For the first time, I wondered if love and trust had blinded me to something deliberate. Maybe I wasn't imagining things after all. Maybe something was deeply wrong in my own home. It happened on a Tuesday morning, around 8:15 a.m. I was standing at the kitchen sink when Brittany came in. Her tone clipped, her face set like stone. She told me it was time to start paying rent. I thought I'd misheard her. My own house. Rent. The words didn't make sense together. Then I looked at Daniel, standing behind her, arms crossed, eyes down. He didn't say a word. My chest went hollow. There was this strange ringing in my ears, like the world had gone silent except for that sound. I wanted to ask how we got here, how my son, the boy I raised, The man who once cried when his father died could stand there and let his wife treat me like an unwanted guest. But the words stuck somewhere between my heart and my throat. Brittany's voice kept going, calm but cold, explaining how expenses had gone up, how things needed to be fair. I could barely hear her. I just stared at Daniel, waiting, hoping. But he didn't look at me once. When they left the kitchen, I stood there for what felt like hours. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. The air felt heavy, almost unbreathable. My hands shook as I touched the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. I'd known something was wrong for a long time, but this was the moment it broke. Later that evening, I went to my room and started packing a small bag. Just the essentials, some clothes, my medication, a few family photos. The act of folding each item felt like stitching up an open wound. I wasn't crying anymore. I think I'd run out of tears. As I reached for my husband's old dresser, I noticed a folder wedged behind the bottom drawer. It was dusty, tucked away, almost forgotten. Inside were documents, insurance papers, old tax forms, and then I saw it, the original house deed, signed by both of us, notarized, sealed. My name. Only my name. My heart thudded in my chest. I read it twice, 3 times, just to be sure. The edges of the paper were worn, but the truth was still clear. The house was mine, legally, fully, and undeniably mine. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me. The fear didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling me. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the folder open in my lap, and stared at the paper under the dim light. The people living down the hall weren't family anymore. They were strangers. But strangers could be dealt with. Maybe, for the first time, I wasn't powerless after all. The next morning, I sat in the living room, the house still and cold. The folder lay open on my lap, the deed staring back at me like a quiet reminder of who I used to be. My fingers traced the edges of the paper, feeling its weight. For months, I'd felt invisible in my own home. But now, that thin piece of paper, creased, faded, real, felt like something solid again, something that was mine. The ache in my chest was still there, but beneath it, something steadier began to grow. I thought about my husband, how hard he worked for this home, how proud he was the day we paid it off. He would never have wanted me to surrender it to manipulation and deceit. That thought settled into me like a slow, quiet fire. By late morning, I got dressed, brushed my hair, and drove into town. My hands trembled a little on the steering wheel, but there was clarity in my movements. At the legal aid office, a young woman listened as I explained what had happened. She looked at the documents, nodded slowly, and told me something I hadn't heard in a long time, that what they'd done wasn't right, and that I still had options. I remember walking out into the sunlight after that conversation. It was brighter than I expected. The air smelled like rain on concrete, clean and sharp. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what they'd taken from me. I was thinking about what I still had. Proof, a voice, my own 2 hands. That night, I went through every drawer and cabinet, pulling out receipts, letters, anything that tied me to this house. I labeled envelopes, made copies, stacked everything neatly. The sound of paper sliding against paper felt almost rhythmic, like the first beat of something new. There was no anger left. Not the loud kind, anyway. What I felt now was quieter, steadier, like standing on solid ground after drifting too long. They thought I was powerless. They thought my age made me weak, that love made me blind. But they forgot something important. Age doesn't erase strength, it distills it. As I turned off the lamp and the house sank into silence, I knew what I had to do. Not out of vengeance, but truth. I was ready to fight, not with anger, but with patience, with proof, with dignity. I set the table that morning as if it were any other day. The same cups, the same chairs. But the air felt different, still, charged, waiting. I'd asked them to sit down for a family conversation. I could tell from Brittany's tone when she agreed that she thought I was giving up. Daniel's short reply told me he was relieved to have it over with. They came in at 2:30 p.m. sharp, dressed neatly, like they were meeting a bank manager. Brittany's perfume lingered too strong in the air. Daniel avoided my eyes. They sat across from me, confident, rehearsed. For months, they had taken control of this house, my life, my peace. But not today. I listened quietly as they started speaking. The same patronizing tone, about fairness, responsibility, moving forward. Their words no longer had power. I felt a strange calm instead. A stillness I hadn't known in a long time. My heartbeat was steady. My voice, when I finally spoke, didn't tremble. I laid the folder on the table, the same one I'd found in my husband's old dresser, and slid it toward them. They looked confused at first. Then I told them, simply, what I'd learned. That the original deed was still in my name. That every update they had filed was fraudulent. That an attorney and investigator were now aware. Brittany's face changed first. Her smile cracked. Her eyes darted toward Daniel. He froze. The silence that followed was almost deafening. The confidence drained from the room. The air grew heavy, but I didn't move. I just sat there, watching the two people I had once loved like family shrink under the truth. They tried to recover, to explain, but there was no ground left to stand on. I could see it in their posture, in the way Daniel finally looked at me. Not with love, not even with guilt, but with the stunned realization that I wasn't powerless anymore. When I stood up, my chair barely made a sound. I told them, calmly, that I expected them to leave. There was no yelling, no scene, just truth laid bare. As I watched them walk out that door, I didn't feel victory or revenge, just release. The house felt lighter somehow, like it was breathing again. That day wasn't about revenge. It was about getting my life back. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I finally had. The house feels different now, quieter, but in the right way. When I wake up, sunlight spills through the kitchen window and lands on the same counter where everything once fell apart. The air smells like fresh paint and lemon oil. I make my coffee the way I always used to, slowly, carefully, like a small ceremony marking the start of another day I've earned back. It took weeks to clear the rooms, to remove what they left behind. But as I packed each box, I felt something lift. The silence that once felt heavy now feels peaceful. I've started repainting the walls, choosing softer colors, warm beige, pale green. In the afternoons, I work in the garden again. The soil is rough on my hands, but it feels good. I planted daisies along the fence, the same kind my husband loved. They're already pushing through the dirt, reaching for the light. Sometimes I think about Daniel, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of distant sorrow. I hope he finds his way back to himself someday. I've stopped replaying what happened. There's nothing left to untangle. Some things you don't fix. You just release. I've learned that starting over isn't about pretending the pain never happened. It's about choosing what comes next. About rebuilding the small, quiet moments that make life feel like your own again. Every morning now, when I water the garden or open the windows, I feel it, a steady kind of freedom. Not loud or dramatic, just mine. The past still lives in this house, but so does something new. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not surviving anymore. I'm beginning again. Looking back now, I don't see my story as one of loss. I see it as one of rediscovery. What happened took everything I thought I could rely on, and yet, somehow, it gave me back myself. I learned that peace doesn't always come from keeping the people you love close. Sometimes it comes from letting go, standing up, and remembering your own worth. Trust can be broken. Family can disappoint you. But self-respect, that's something no one can take unless you hand it over. I used to think starting over at my age was impossible. Now I know it's never too late to begin again, to rebuild from truth, and to love yourself enough to walk through the fire without losing who you are. If you're listening to this and you've been hurt, please know what's left of you is enough to start over. You're stronger than you think, and your story isn't done yet. Thank you for spending this time with me. It means more than you know. Have you ever faced something like this? Had to rebuild after someone broke your trust? Tell me in the comments below. I read every one.